take us to the heart of the Middle East. We'll hear stories of women sometimes unheard, sometimes unnamed, but who stand sometimes unnamed, but who continue to stand tall despite all the hardships. We'll take a closer look at the lives of women who carry the weight of society and often make invisible visible. Let's welcome Areej Fayad to the stage with applause for her talk on women in the Middle East.
Şimdi sahneye çıkacak olan konuşmacımız bizleri Orta Doğu'nun kalbine götürecek. Bazen adı bilinmeyen, bazen sesi duyulmayan ama zorluklara rağmen dimdik duran kadınların hikayelerini dinleyeceğiz. Topluma yükünü taşıyan ve çoğu zaman görünmeyeni görünür kılan bu kadınların dünyasına yakından bakacağız. Orta Doğu'daki kadınlar konusuyla Areej Fayad'ı büyük alkışlarınızla sahneye davet ediyoruz.
I'm Areej. If I believed everything that Hollywood shows about Middle Eastern women, I would assume that I was supposed to be locked in a palace, waiting for someone to let me out. But meanwhile, I just had to convince my mom to let me out past 10 p.m. But jokes aside, these stereotypes made about Middle Eastern women can often cross the line, making them racist rather than funny. So let's take a closer look at what's real and what's just a bad plot twist. First, let's start by giving some information about the Middle East. Well, the Middle East is not a country, which shockingly, some people didn't know that. It's a diverse region with over 20 countries, with different traditions, laws, and languages. Yet, somehow, Middle Eastern women are all painted with the same broad brush. They're either oppressed, voiceless, or hidden away. When in reality, women across this region are politicians, activists, CEOs, doctors, and many more. But now wait, does that mean we don't face challenges? Absolutely not. But the problem is that instead of talking about real problems, people decide to focus on things such as, are Middle Eastern women even allowed to make their own choices? But in reality, women across this region have always had a huge role in shaping their societies, whether in medicine, education, activism, you name it. But, where do these stereotypes even come from? Well, obviously the media plays a huge role, since, Hollywood and news outlets love to focus on the most extreme cases. Yeah? And, even fun fact, the stereotype of Middle Eastern women being oppressed started in the 19th century. And then, Hollywood and news outlets took that information and misspread it everywhere, which led to hiding these women's progresses and voices. Another problem is the lack of education. The lack of education about this region. For example, not one, but actually two of my friends once asked me, "Oh, do you guys even have vehicles or internet in Egypt, or do you still travel by camels or stuff?" And of course, these jokes can sometimes be funny. I'm not going to deny that. But the problem is that these stereotypes can often be harmful, especially when they are said by the wrong people in the wrong times. And they're harmful because they cover the voices and struggles of these women. Yeah. And they cover their stories and voices over time. And moving on, let's talk about the double standards. Let me give you a bunch of examples. Let's say a Middle Eastern woman chooses to wear the hijab. What does that make her? Oppressed, isn't it? But let's say a Western woman chooses to wear a headscarf in winter. What does that make her? A fashion icon, obviously. And another example. Let's say a Middle Eastern woman chooses to stay at home. What does that make her? Oh, poor woman, she has no freedom, right? But let's say that a Western woman chooses to stay at home. What does that mean? Oh, she's just embracing motherhood, isn't she? The problem is, do you see the pattern? And do you see the comparison? For example, I know I gave a bunch of examples, but for example, let's say, let me tell you right now to imagine any random country in Europe. You would probably think of the amazing tourism areas in there, wouldn't you? But right now, if I tell you to imagine, just think of any random Arab country in the Middle East. You would probably try to think of the you would probably try to think of the worst image possible, wouldn't you? But now that I've mentioned some of the problems, how do we fix this? The first step is simple: listen to us. Not Hollywood, not the media, not things you hear from other people. Listen to the real people living their real lives. Their stories are more powerful than any stereotype. We have already seen progress. For example, how about a few minutes ago I mentioned that social media is really harmful, especially for these women. Actually, it has been really helpful for these women, since it has given these women a platform where they can actually share their stories. And the fact is, there are people who are actually listening there. And another example is that the UAE and Saudi Arabia government have seen a massive rise in the female entrepreneurs over the past decade. Change is happening. It's just not always making the headlines. And now, just to sum up what I've been saying, Middle Eastern women are not all the same. We're diverse, capable, and powerful. And the more we challenge these misconceptions, the closer we get to a world where these women are actually heard instead of being talked about. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.